Welcome, everyone, to Data Blueprints. My name is Abby Pint. I oversee marketing at OGX. Thanks for joining us today. Brock Bauer will be leading us. He's the expert in this area. He's a data whiz. He's helped to transform and invigorate and implement data management and data governance programs for countless organizations. He has some great info in store for you guys. He'll be covering a lot of content today, so feel free to take notes to interact throughout the next hour. We'll have a dedicated Q&A at the end. But this is just a great opportunity to ask questions and start conversations. Feel free to take screenshots. We will have this presentation posted on our site at the end, so you can access it again. But with that said, I will turn it over to Brock to get started and dive into the good stuff.
All right, so today's topic is data governance. We will touch briefly on what data governance is and why it's a pretty good idea. But really, the bulk of today is going to be focused on how do you build an effective data governance program? How do you get from maybe where you are today, if that's not in place, to being a little more ready for implementation? So I'm Brock Bauer. I've been with OGX for 7 or 8 years. We are an IT strategy, technology, digital transformation consulting company. So whether that's standing up a program like this or helping better manage IT assets, executive coaching for your IT leaders, we do pretty much everything in that space. So without further ado, let's jump right in. We'll start off with what is data governance? There's a lot of confusion out there. Folks tend to mistake data governance for data management or use them interchangeably. If we think about it in the way that data management is what you do to manage the data, data governance is really all about the decision rights around that data management program. So how are you making those decisions? How are you communicating all of that out? With our framework over here, the way that I like to think about it is data governance in a lot of ways is it's the policies, it's the standards, it's the organization that you set up around your data management program. It's the strategy that you're putting in place, the processes, how you're communicating from the folks who are involved in data governance out to the rest of the users. And the critical thing here that we like to keep at the center is organizational change management. Any governance program really is contingent on good organizational change management. I think there's going to be a lot of strategies that you'll find in this presentation that will help you be a little bit more effective and take more advantage of how you manage change as we go through this. So I want to talk about some of the different roles that are involved in a data governance program. There are certainly a lot more than this, but these are the ones that are most relevant for what we're talking about today. In both the IT and the business side, you have folks who are the data owners, right? They're accountable for a specific domain of data, specific data sets. Generally speaking, these folks are going to be really more like the senior manager, maybe executive level, where they're owning it, but they're not necessarily super involved in the day-to-day. The data stewards, that next level down, these are the folks who are responsible on a day-to-day basis for the management of that data. So they're in the weeds. They know quite a bit about what the data is doing for them, where it's coming from, where it's going, and what some of the issues are. On the IT side of the house, we also have folks who are what we call data custodians. These are really the folks who are kind of on the back end, making sure that the databases are functioning correctly, that integrations are set up the right way, that if there's a policy around how we do something and they need to put that into place, they're going to be the ones to do that on the back end. Now on the business, the data users, these really are the end users. They're the ones who are clocking in every day, using, consuming, reporting, whatever data they need to for their job function. So those are the major roles that we'll talk about for right now, and we'll refer back to those in a little bit. One thing that I think is really critical, we are starting to see more people jump onto this idea that data really is an asset. And just like any of your other assets, it can be incredibly valuable to you. Now, for folks who are in a tech-centric, data-centric field already, this is probably preaching to the choir. But we do have a lot of folks out there who maybe data is kind of an afterthought. It's something that they know is important, but they're really not setting up anything official around how they manage it or take advantage of that. What we hope that we can do through this data governance program and the strategies that we talk about is to help you bring your organization from maybe that data phobe, data mixer category and bring you up to the data bore level where you're really dependent on and making decisions based on all of the data that you have available to you. So why data governance might be a good idea? Really, the big one here is decision making, making better decisions. That's really the whole point of a data governance program. If you have a great model around making decisions for your data management program, you are going to leave your users a lot more confident that the data that they're using is maybe higher quality, that they can trust it. They're going to be able to put more emphasis on that data. And ultimately, that's going to drive some of what they're doing on the delivery side of things and improving the value that you're getting out of the data that you have. Things like data accessibility, integrity, quality, security, all that fun stuff. While we're doing the day-to-day for those through data management, on the data governance side, this is really about crafting a program that's going to help define what all of these rules, all these policies, how all of this works at a decision level. So those are some of the drivers that we think are pretty important for why we might want to take a data governance initiative and take advantage of that. But we'd like to hear from you. So Abby's going to pull up a poll and just let us know real quick, what are some of the business drivers that you have when you think about data governance?
Yep. Sorry, I'm watching this right now. And this will be an open poll, so you guys can give open responses.
Yeah, feel free to add anything you'd like in there. Security, decision making. Lots on security, definitely. Having source of truth, compliance. All right. Looks like a lot of security, compliance, all great answers. All right, well, we'll keep going. Okay, so we've covered, at a very high level what data governance is. What we're going to get into now is how you build the foundation for your data governance program, and how we get this started. So what we're going to focus on in this particular section is we're going to be building out the really clear picture of the issues, pain points, the challenges, all the reasons why we need to make a change. Then we'll get into understanding what that at least initial vision for the future state looks like from all your different stakeholders. That'll help us determine who's ready, who's not, maybe who's more excited, who has a better appetite for data governance, and who needs a little bit of help to let them see the light on this. And we'll wrap this up with building a compelling business case for your data governance program that you're going to be able to use to shop around to your senior leadership team and really start to get some buy-in for the program. So the way that I think about doing an assessment for data governance, if we start off with talking to our stakeholders, this is really, really critical. We want to be able to engage the business, understand who they are, what do they do, what kind of data are they using, where does that data come from, what are they using it for? All of that is really, really critical. The feedback that we get from our stakeholders is going to help inform our needs assessment. So like I said, it's building out the challenges, the issues, really understanding how things work today. But it's also about identifying maybe some opportunities where we can get some quick wins, where we can get some longer term opportunities for improvement that will come out of that, and start really building out the business case. The insights then that we're taking from this needs assessment, This is really going to help us when we get into establishing that future state vision for the program. So defining what that vision is, and then getting the leadership team to buy into that and realize that there's a lot of room for us to grow here. So that's the methodology really that we're going to follow for the rest of this section. So as you're going through your process and you're really trying to understand the needs, the issues, the pain points, when we've done this with some of our other clients, we have run into issues that fall, in my mind, into three major categories. So the first one is lack of standards and policy. This might be as simple as, hey, we don't have the policy. There are no standards in place. Okay, that's a pretty good starting point. At least we know where we're at. In more cases than not, though, folks do have policies and standards in place, but maybe they haven't been updated in 5, 10, or 15 years. And there's a whole lot that's changed since they were written. Another big one that we see is the viewership on these policies oftentimes is incredibly low. So if you have an organization with a couple thousand people and 5 of them have taken the time to look at your policy, do you really have a policy? Are you really implementing that? So in addition to just not having a policy, it's have you been communicating that correctly? Have you been selling that to the organization and training them on that the way you should be? And a lot of times the answer is no. Another one that we see is really around disparate data sets. What I mean by that is people that have data all over the place, especially from a work from home context. How much of your data is sitting on someone's personal hard drive, and it's never going to make it back into a system of record. It's never going to make it back to where someone can use that and draw their own insights from that. That's a big problem, especially today. You're going to find areas where folks have inconsistent sets of the same data. So maybe you've got a BI portal and someone has uploaded a data set, someone else has downloaded that, made some changes, done some analysis, and then posted that one back up. All of a sudden, you have 2 data sets that say the same thing, more or less, but they're not quite the same. You don't know which one to trust, which one's higher quality, who's the source for this. And really, the biggest one in my mind that I think you're going to find is quite a bit more common than you would think is there are a lot of stakeholders who really just are not aware of the data that's available to them. We had an example from one of the clients that we worked with. There was a group that was responsible for managing a lot of the asset data, and they were lacking data on some of the real estate assets. And so they had gone through the trouble of starting to plan for a pretty large study that would get them all of that real estate data, not realizing that there was another group that actually had all that data already. So if your folks don't know what data is available to them, that could potentially be a pretty costly mistake in terms of just the time and money that would be spent needlessly on something like that. And one of the other major problems that we see from the different groups that we work with is they're really not clear on what the decision rights are. Let's say you have a business unit that has quite a bit of pretty useful data and they just really don't want to share it. Who arbitrates that discussion? How do we come to a resolution on that? Maybe you've got a group that likes to do something one way and another group that has a totally different set of standards when it comes to data. How do we get them to get on the same page? Those decision rights usually are not super well defined in an organization that doesn't have data governance. So what the stakeholders are looking for in most of these cases is they want to have a decision-making process that is aligned with best practices, that they are able to directly contribute to, collaborate on, have some sort of voice in those decisions. And they want it to be made early enough in the process that we can avoid a lot of those downstream issues that happen when we don't talk about some of these issues up front. Okay, so at this point, we've gone through, we've talked about, understanding the needs of all your different stakeholders. The next thing that we want to do is to start getting an initial idea of the future state. And really, when we talk about it at this stage, we want to get an individual perspective. So as you're talking to your groups, you want to really do it one-on-one. They're going to be much more candid when it's just them in the room and we're really focused on them and their needs and their vision. Try and get that feedback one group at a time. As you're getting their feedback, especially for the future state, this is going to allow you to gauge what their readiness level and excitement level is. If you've got a group that's competent and they're already they're doing pretty well at managing their data and they're just looking for the next step up from a governance standpoint, those are going to be great champions for you. You're also going to have a lot of folks who are on the fence. They're a little more neutral. They can be convinced to become champions, but it's going to take some convincing. And then you've got the folks on the other end of the scale who are what we call detractors. They're probably never going to get on board. They're never going to want to do this. And you won't necessarily change their minds, but if we can show some quick wins, if we can win over the folks who are in the middle, that's going to give us a pretty good groundswell movement that we'll be able to use to take even the detractors along with us as we build the program. And the last one from the best practices standpoint is when you're getting all of this individual feedback, start thinking about the bigger picture. What is that broader organization-wide future state vision? What might that look like? And if you start thinking about that now, you're going to be in much better shape when we start talking about strategy and really going deep into what the total future state vision is going to look like. So if you're going to ask your stakeholders some of these questions, it's pretty simple. Ask them what their vision is in a couple sentences. Just give me your high-level vision for what you see as the future of data governance. There's going to be a lot of issues that they have, a lot of things they want to do, but what are the top priorities? Maybe top 3 priorities. This is going to help you narrow down what some of the major categories are that you can start to focus on as we get towards planning for implementation. And you also want to ask them what opportunities do they think that they're going to have if we're able to implement data governance effectively? Because there's going to be a bunch of opportunities, and this is going to help us sell our vision with the business case. So our insight here is all about excitement and momentum. This is really the first opportunity. You're talking about future state. You're getting people to kind of view the future in a way that's better than it is today. And that builds excitement. Now, from an organizational change standpoint, excitement and momentum are really, really critical. If you can show that things are moving and shaking, things are happening, this is really turning into a full-fledged program, it's going to be a lot easier to convince people to come along with you. Now, at the same time, if you lose that excitement, you lose that momentum, it is incredibly difficult to win that back. And that can happen from time to time. So keep in mind that excitement, keep in mind organizational change from the forefront. And if you are really going to approach this seriously, you need to consider what that shift in momentum is going to look like over time. Okay, so let's talk about the business case now. Your business case is more or less a culmination of all the things we just talked about. It's going to say why governance is necessary. What are the major problems that your organization has that you're trying to solve? Who specifically is experiencing these problems? What impact are those problems having on their group? If you can go and say, hey, Bob in operations has this issue because of a lack of data governance, and this is the result of that, that paints a much more compelling picture than just a general high-level view of generic problems, right? If you can really point to some specific instances that need to be addressed, that's going to help you sell this program more effectively. The last one is, what are the major objectives of the governance program in a high level? What are we hoping to accomplish when we do this? So what you're going to do once you have that business case completed is this is your opportunity to go talk to executive sponsors. An absolute bare minimum of one from the business is probably going to be necessary. Data governance, IT typically starts it, but this is a business-driven, business-led program. So having strong executive sponsors who can be your champion, who can tell the folks underneath them that this is the program that we're subscribing to, that's really, really important and highly necessary. Second thing it's going to allow you to do is you're going to get a lot of questions when you're presenting this around the organization. If you've done your due diligence during the assessment phase, you're going to be prepared for all of those, and you're going to be able to start educating the users, start educating folks. Data governance can be a kind of an amorphous concept to a lot of people. If you've done your homework and you've done a good job up to this point, you're going to be able to start bringing those people along, building their understanding, building their maturity for data governance, and that's going to pay dividends in the long run. And the last piece that we have is you're going to be, as you're getting those questions, you're going to be getting more feedback, and that's going to help you fill in some of the gaps that maybe you missed. So as we start preparing for developing our strategy, this is a good opportunity to go and maybe fill back in a little bit in the needs assessment, fill some things back in our future state, and build a better business case. Okay, so next up, we have done the needs assessment. Now we're really focused on the future state, what we'll call defining your strategy for data governance. In this phase, this is all about moving away from doing things individually and really bringing everyone together in a collaborative sort of environment. We're going to be talking about things like vision, mission, guiding principles, setting goals, and really the most important thing out of this is going to be your target operating model. And that target operating model is going to be the playbook that you use for the program moving forward. So the way that we like to do our strategy work is through a handful of workshops. Your first workshop is going to be vision, mission, and core values. What do we want to be? Why do we want to be that way? And what are the values that we believe in that we're going to try and maintain as we grow this program? This is pretty critical. There's a lot of folks that, they don't like to do the vision and mission work, but especially from an executive sponsor standpoint, if you can have your business sponsors and your IT sponsors who are aligned on the same vision and the same mission, that's going to be huge as they try and build a broader coalition for you from the top down. So very important that the business is involved there. The next workshop that we'll do is really around goals and objectives. And we want to set realistic, achievable goals, have some objectives that line up to that. And then ultimately we'll translate those down even further in our third workshop, which is around roadmaps and action plans. And this is the nuts and bolts of how your program is going to work throughout implementation. So the first workshop, and these best practices really apply to all the workshops. But who you want to have at these, your IT and business sponsors, definitely for workshop number one, super critical. I wouldn't do it without them. They're going to have to be aligned, like I said, on that top line strategic vision. You really want to have at least one participant from your major business units attending all of these workshops. If you've got a really big department somewhere, maybe you get a couple folks, 2 or 3 folks from them. But you need a good cross section of the organization because this is an organization-wide program. Folks have to be involved in the process and aligned. Most of the time, you want this to be data owners, data stewards, and those SMEs and end users, right? So these are folks that are in the weeds with the data. They understand it. The folks that we spoke to in the needs assessment, that's going to be a great list of people to include in these workshops. So the best practices that we have for you here, come prepared with some ideas and examples. I think we've definitely all been in one of those workshops where someone brings up a discussion item, everyone looks at the floor and doesn't really say anything, and at the end of the day, you don't get any real value out of that. If you can come to the table with some ideas already prepared, which we got from that initial future state visioning work we did in phase 1, you're going to be able to jumpstart those conversations a lot more effectively. Another thing that you're going to be able to do, what you're going to want to do, is to make these as interactive as possible. People need to be getting up, moving around, discussing, writing. One of the strategies that we like to use for this is we put poster boards up on the wall and give everyone a stack of sticky notes. And all throughout the workshop, they're writing down their ideas, putting them up on the board, presenting. It's a great way to facilitate a lot of interaction and keep people focused on what the task is. And it sounds kind of silly, but we've had more than a few people come back to us after one of those sticky note sessions and say that was actually really effective. So maybe it's something that you might want to steal for yourselves. The last one here is don't leave too much time. Like I said before, momentum is really critical. If you have your vision and mission session in January and then you do your goals and objectives in July, that's way too much time. People have already forgotten what you talked about last time. Their minds have been on something else. So try and keep these, try and schedule and execute all of these in a reasonable amount of time. Now, the insight that I'll share with you here is this is a great opportunity to start building consensus before the workshop. So there's a school of thought out there that says 40% of the meeting happens before the meeting, 40% of the meeting happens after the meeting, and the meeting itself is really only 20%. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. If you can meet individually with some of your stakeholders before these workshops take place, you can ask them, the questions that are going to come up in the workshop. They're going to be able to think about that. They might have a more prepared response than they would if you hadn't done that. The other thing that's really useful here is there's going to be invariably some groups that have very different ideas of what that future state should look like. If you're able to get in front of that and start planning for how you might mediate that discussion, those disagreements, maybe come up with some strategies to streamline that, you're going to have a much, much, much better workshop experience. So I can't tell you enough how important some of those pre-meeting discussions can be. The next workshop that we're going to do is really about setting goals and objectives. And I like to think about goals more or less the same way I think about KPIs. And the SMART KPI methodology applies pretty well here. Your goals should be pretty specific. You should be able to measure progress against them. They should be achievable, realistic, and you should be able to put some time towards them. So I put an example up here. Maybe the goal for your organization is all of our data is identified, it's cataloged, and it's available to the appropriate stakeholders. That really meets most of those criteria that we have on the left. We can measure against that. It's pretty specific. We know what we're trying to achieve, and it's reasonable that at some point in the future we might be able to do that. Because we've constructed the goal that way, it's pretty easy to then go down into your objectives, that next level lower. Okay, well, if we're going to do that, we're going to have an inventory of our data. We're going to have to be able to classify the data in some capacity. We'll be maybe implementing a catalog system so that folks can see what data is available to them. And then we'll put in place the access controls. And each of those objectives really kind of match up with that SMART methodology on the other side. We can go a level further and start breaking that out into actual individual actions. So maybe we're looking at number 3, establish access controls and permissions. Okay, well, we know that to do that, we're going to have to define the role-based access levels. We're going to have to apply those controls to our data catalog, and we're going to have to notify the users of how that all works. And as we get further and further down from our goal, it's pretty easy to start assigning owners and timelines and budget, anything that you might need to start really building out the plan for implementation. So start with a strong goal, make sure that it's something tangible and realistic. Use that to go a level deeper into your objectives, and then your objectives will easily translate into an action plan. All right, so at this point, we rooted ourselves in best practices. We've done the needs assessment. We've done a lot of the future state visioning work that goes into our charter. The last piece here is the target operating model. And like I said before, the operating model, this is your playbook for data governance. Everything that anyone could want to know about data governance should live in this document. So it's your framework, your vision, mission, goals, your action plans, KPIs that you're thinking about, roles and responsibilities for the groups or committees that are going to be involved in this. If you have all of this in one spot, it's really easy to go back and one, reference everything, and number two, it's easy to make sure that you have that single source of truth where no matter who's working or helping out with data governance, they can always refer back to this document as this is the playbook that we're moving forward with. Okay, so this is something that not a lot of folks think about ahead of time, and that is software for data governance and data management. So what I want to talk about today is the software necessary? Do you really need it? When do you need it? What kind of platforms are out there? What solution might be best for your organization? And then set the stage for how you might go about selecting that software. So the question, is this necessary? And the answer is yes. I would say that maybe for the first year or so, you can get away without having some sort of software to support your data governance efforts. But after year one, certainly as you get into year two, this is a mandatory thing that you're going to have to think about. And all these different software platforms, they all do different things. Some of the major functions that you might get some value out of would be a data catalog, for example, cataloging the data, making it findable by everyone in the agency who might need access to it, including the non-technical folks. It might help you measure data quality, data privacy, manage all of that. If you're in a position where, let's say your governance program has decided that we're going to have these rules for data quality, and this is how we're going to measure data quality. If you don't have any means of measuring or managing that, you're really not able to accomplish much of anything. So some functions like that are going to be important. And the other thing it'll help you do is apply policies, manage your integrations. There's a million things that these tools do. They're coming out with new functionality all the time. So you're going to want to start thinking about what kind of software is right for you. And I guess that's what we'll start with here. So Abby will put up another poll. And the question that we have is, as far as software goes, what are some of the benefits that are interesting to you? Maybe it's making the data easily findable. Maybe it's managing data quality or something completely different. So let us know in the survey or leave a comment in the chat, and be curious to see what you have to say. Right, we got a lot of folks saying that security is important, making data findable, managing our quality. All right. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so let's talk about what kind of software platform might be of interest to you. So you can really break this out into two main categories. You have comprehensive, do-it-all software, things like Atacama, things like Informatica, right? They've got a module for just about everything. The nice thing about comprehensive software is it's going to do everything pretty well. It's probably not going to do anything the absolute best, though. So you get a wide swath of functionality that's going to be hopefully good enough. The other nice thing here, fewer integrations, having everything in one system. You don't have to train people on 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces of software. Everyone gets skilled and trained in just that one piece of software. That can be a big deal. For those of you that have managed messy integrations before and had to go through that process, this might be something that interests you. What comes along with that, though, is a lot of times the upfront cost is going to be a little bit higher with something like this, especially if you're going for multiple modules at once. The implementation effort, generally speaking, is going to be a little bit more difficult. And then you're going to be reliant on that vendor. So let's say you spend all the time and the money and you get some comprehensive piece of software, and all of a sudden that vendor, maybe their support isn't quite as good as you had hoped it would be, or maybe you run into some issues that weren't apparent beforehand. You end up kind of stuck. And now on the flip side, you've got these, what we call best of breed software. They're targeted really at a specific niche, and they do that niche pretty well. Um, Generally speaking, because these don't have such an expansive footprint, you're going to find that they're maybe a little more flexible. You can do a little more configuration if you're interested in that. And the upfront cost, the level of effort for implementing it, oftentimes is going to be lower than it will be for a comprehensive software. The cons on this one, more integrations, more opportunities for data to get siloed away. Happens all the time. So be mindful of that. As you're growing, let's say you're starting to get really advanced, are all of the tools that you've purchased so far, are they going to be able to scale with you? That's a pretty reasonable question that you're going to have to ask yourself. So keep those in mind as you think about the type of software that you're looking to go after. And a great way to go about selecting software is to first ask yourself some questions. What is the functionality that I absolutely need first? Maybe it's the data catalog, or maybe it's something related to security. Figure out what is most important to you, maybe your top few functions, and that's going to help inform how you go through this. You want to ask yourself, how much momentum do I really have? If you've got IT and the business and everyone is really excited, they're really ready to move forward, you're going to have an easier time maybe going after a more expensive, more expansive piece of technology. If you don't have a lot of momentum, you don't have a lot of support, you might be pigeonholed to something with a lot smaller of a budget and a lot smaller of a scope. You want to understand what your limitations are. If it's a funding limitation, maybe that means we need to beef the business case up. If it's a people limitation, like we don't have the right skills in-house, maybe we have to come up with some other method of mitigating that. And the last question is how quickly are you expecting to scale this up? If you're going to plan to slow roll data governance and it's going to take you a couple years, and then you're going to, really get into it after a couple of years, that's a very different scenario when you're selecting software than someone who's saying, we're going to go full bore into this. We're going to dedicate a ton of resources and do this as fast as possible. So think about some of those questions when you're considering the kind of software that you're looking at. We recommend that you use a formal software selection team. Pull in a subset of the folks from the workshops. You want IT and business folks. The business folks are actually probably going to use the software quite a bit. So you're going to want to make sure that they are involved in that process. They have some ownership in that selection process. And that's really going to help make sure that there's buy-in later on down the line. The next one, from a best practices standpoint, make sure you see the tools in action. There are dozens and dozens of vendors who are all competing out there that all do things a little bit differently. And the best way that you're going to be able to recognize those differences is through a demo. And they're very happy to show you what they're capable of doing. I recommend you use demonstration scripts if possible. So if you can pull together an apples to apples comparison of functions, that's going to give you a much better understanding of how these vendors differentiate themselves from each other in those specific areas. You also want to make sure that the sponsors are involved, right? Especially if you're buying a comprehensive set of software, this is going to be a pretty big lift, and the sponsors need to be aware of that. They need to know why this software is necessary, what they're getting out of it, the kind of value that they're going to see. So make sure you have at least an IT and a business sponsor who are present for some of these discussions. And one of the insights that we'll share here is that it's really important that you keep the selection team manageable. The last thing you want to do is bring 50 people into a room who are going to ask a million different questions that are very specific to whatever their niche is. If you can go in with a clear agenda, a clear demonstration script, 5, 7, 10 people who are a good cross section of your organization, that's going to be really, really helpful for you. Okay, let's talk next. So at this point, we have gone through the assessment, our future state. We've talked about software. Let's start planning for implementation. So see how far we've come, pull together a plan for implementation, and then maybe some ways that OGX might be able to help you out with that. So from this standpoint, like I said before, we've done everything. We've done our assessment. We've built out the vision for the future state. We've formalized that in our target operating model. Now we're ready for implementation planning. This is where we want to start determining which activities go first. There's a million things that you can potentially do to start off your data governance program. Deciding what goes first is going to be an important step. That'll help us build out our initial project plan. We'll be able to maybe start procurements if that's something you're going to go down the route of doing. And we also want to keep our stakeholders engaged. So as we're planning for implementation, don't leave your stakeholders in the dark. Make sure that you're still communicating them with them about the progress that you're making, the things that are coming up on the horizon. Just so it's always something that's at the back of their mind. Very important from an organizational change standpoint. So when I think about how do we decide what comes first, one of the tools that we use is what we call an impact effort matrix. And it just plots what takes high effort, but is going to have a high impact, what maybe doesn't take much effort at all and still has a great impact, and everything in between. So generally speaking, from a change perspective, quick wins are your friends. If it's something that doesn't take a whole lot of effort and it's going to have a big impact on the program or the organization, that's a great place to start. So maybe it's setting up your data governance council or getting sign off on your data governance policy, taking a look at your data warehouse and starting to map some of that out if it hasn't been done before. Those are great activities that you can do in a relatively small amount of time. It's going to have a big impact. You're going to have other things that are much bigger efforts. So maybe it's onboarding your data management, data governance tool, or it's developing a whole suite of standards and classifications for all the data you have. While those are absolutely necessary and are going to have a great impact, you're going to probably need to do a little bit more planning for those and make sure that you're spacing those out effectively in a way that your project teams can handle it. The other work, what we call fill-in work, these are things that you're just going to be doing as the time allows. So maybe we're going to be analyzing data quality through our tool. Maybe we're going to be training or giving lunch and learns or webinars for our colleagues, right? That's work that you can do in the interim. And then the last section you have are these hard slogs, the work that doesn't have a lot of impact. It kind of sucks to do, but you have to do it anyways. My recommendation here, just try and break that up as much as you can. If you can break a gigantic slog up into 5 or 6 manageable chunks, all of a sudden it gets a little bit easier to do that. Okay, so how can we help? OGX, we've done this a handful of places. I'll call out one in particular, LA Metro. We really essentially went through this exact process from start to finish. So LA Metro had a lot of challenges with the data, things that were fragmented, no data governance in place, data in a lot of different systems, people not sure of where the data was. So we went through and we started off, like I said, with that needs assessment, talked to a ton of different folks all over the agency. We helped coax a tentative future state out of them. We brought all the stakeholders back together to build out that target operating model, just like you saw in this presentation. And ultimately, the result of that is you had a bunch of people that were involved in co-creating and having some ownership in the data governance program that was being built. And it was a pretty easy sell to go and get a couple $1 million worth of funding for the program. So this can be used. It is effective. And if you'd like help doing that, we're certainly able to. Okay.
This is open-ended at this point. If anybody has questions or wants clarification or wants to discuss any points of this presentation a little bit further, feel free to jump into to the chat.
All right. Any questions, anyone? All right. So our CIO struck the word governance from our vocabulary. data governance and information governance is the domain that I struggle with that the most. Do you have any tips for language and communication? Um, the best way I can think to do that is if we think about, let me go back in this presentation a bit. So what the business case is going to help you do, even as you trying to have these discussions, it's going to help you frame things a little bit differently. So maybe they're not so interested in the word governance, and they're not so interested in decision rights, but maybe you can think about, how do I really clearly frame these problems in a specific way and make these needs very clear to whoever your senior leadership team is. If you can phrase it instead of in a, this is a governance program, this is how it's going to help. Let's talk about the issues, and you can kind of lead them into, well, what are some of maybe the potential solutions, and as they start to think about those, you go, oh, hey, well, it's kind of aligns pretty well with this governance program, or some other way to phrase it. But I think if you really try and focus on the specific issues, frame those in such a way that you're leading them to a line of thought that's consistent with what you're trying to accomplish, I think that's going to be pretty effective for you. Let's see, question, how does this approach change with documents as data? So that is a good question. Part of that is going to be how you deal with document and content management. So getting that information off of a document into a data set, that's a pretty big bear to be able to tackle. So there are some pieces of software out there that as you scan maybe your documents in, you're able to tag those with metadata. You're able to get all of that squared away from a content management perspective. How you ultimately get that in to your systems of record, it's really just going to depend on the type of technologies that you're using. It really is more of a different spin on this. I'd say that's more of a content management question than a data governance question. But once the data is in, it all applies. So maybe through your data governance program, you come up with the methodology and the rules and the policy on how you get that content off of the paper form and into your data sets. So governance would be more around deciding as an organization, how do we best accomplish that, and getting everyone to agree that that's the path that you're going to take. Let's see, how'd you get started with Metro? Just general overview from bid, RFP to completion. So the way we got involved with LA Metro, this is something we had done some previous work for LA Metro. They had, just through some discussions there, we had identified that, hey, there was a big need around data governance. There was a lot of appetite from some other folks in the organization. One of the executives there at Metro, took that feedback seriously from the users. Went through a bid process on that. Some of the challenges, like I had mentioned before, was with the momentum piece. So you can see on our last slide here, this went on over a couple of years, right? So 2019 through COVID happens, everyone leaves, everyone goes home. And all of a sudden it gets a whole heck of a lot more difficult. And there's really not anything you can do to expect that. But that was tough. You lose a lot of that momentum. We've had to go back and rebuild some of that trust with the business stakeholders, really get them to understand that, hey, this is real, this is happening, we're moving forward with this. So that was definitely the biggest one. And if I had to have a lessons learned from that particular engagement, it would have been to try and plan ahead for how we manage our stakeholders that might not be available, might not be in the building, and still keep everyone informed along the way. Keep the timeline, setting expectations. Sounds cool to say data governance. It really takes time, intention, or it takes intention and a long time. How do you address those challenges? Really, it's all about the organizational change, Kevin. If I had to boil it down to anything, it is absolutely a long project. It's going to take you a year to. It might take you 6 months to do all the work that we talked about today. It'll probably take you a full year to really implement that program and get it up and running. Now, the thing is, you get a program like this up and running, it's all about how you manage that over the long term. So when you think about your, let's say your data governance council, they're going to be the main decision-making body. How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep a consistent meeting cadence? How are you, scheduling the different activities that they're going to be undertaking? All of that is rooted in organizational change. So if you, from the beginning, are able to really build a strong foundation, get folks excited, get a lot of champions, they're going to be much more likely to stick around with you over the long run, because data governance is a program that lives on in perpetuity. It's not something you do for a year and then forget about it. Looking good. All right. Well, thank you all so much again. I really do appreciate it. Like Abby said, if you'd like to speak with us a little bit more about this, we'd be happy to set up a meeting with you and go through this. And yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate it. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.